Hello, and welcome. Tonight we open the door to a world where time stands still. A world woven from dreams, whispers, and forgotten wishes. These are not just stories. They are reflections of who we are. Tales of love and loss, of courage and betrayal, of hearts tested in the dark, and light found in unexpected places. Long ago, these tales were shared beside flickering fires, passed from one storyteller to another, until they became timeless echoes that still live within us today. And tonight they come alive once more, just for you. So take a deep breath. Let the noise of the world fade away. Find your quiet corner and let your imagination wander. If this journey touches your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're listening from and what moment in the story stayed with you the most. Your words help these tales travel further, reaching dreamers and believers across the world. Now, let us begin our first tale. In a country orchard where the spring came early and left reluctantly, an apple tree woke to itself with such sweetness that even the bees forgot for a moment that they were busy. The sap climbed like a hymn, the bark loosened, buds swelled into promises. And then, the blossoms burst out, white with a blush the way the dawn blushes when it remembers it has been looked at. Among these blossoms there was one branch that stood higher than the others, a proud curving arm of the tree that thrust itself into the clean blue air, as if it had discovered the sky and meant to keep it. Its flowers were particularly fine, so the branch believed, and their fragrance had the self-satisfaction of a compliment spoken aloud. "Observe," said the branch, trembling with perfume, "how the world admires me." A breeze, polite as a butler, passed through the orchard and rang the blossoms like little bells. The other branches merely tinkled their gratitude, but the proud one could not be quiet where praise might be heard. "The hedge beneath us is very green," it observed, "but an apple blossom is a poem, while a hedge is only a sentence about boundaries." Down at the roots near the low stone wall, there grew a tangle of small, humble lives. Dandelions turning their bright thoughts to the sun, ground ivy writing in green cursive across the dirt, plantain ribbed like a poor man's hand, violets hiding their faces under leaves, and a scatter of little child flowers, the sort that grow without permission and keep their color even in the shadow. The apple branch looked down through its veil of petals in benevolent scorn. "Those are weeds," it said. "They put up their little flags wherever they can steal a patch of soil. No gardener writes a poem to a plantain. No lover wears a wreath of ground ivy. And the dandelion, good heavens, has anyone ever been proud to receive a bouquet of such peasant sons? How fortunate I am, perched high as I am, cultured, bridal, useful. We, the apple blossoms, are promised fruit." At that moment the orchard gate creaked, and a girl entered carrying a wicker basket and a pair of shears whose bright mouth had learned the word snip. She had the sure walk of one who knows where flowers live and why they are needed. Her dress was plain. Her hands were clean in the way hands become when they love both work and water. "Here she comes," breathed the proud branch and lifted itself nearer heaven. "A discerning spirit. She will choose me for her table. Why would she not? I am spring made visible." The girl did not raise her eyes. She knelt by the path and cut a handful of dandelions, those scandalous suns, and a tuft of ground ivy with its little purple bells. She lifted the edge of a stone and coaxed a shy violet into her palm, leaving 3 for the shade. She stroked the plantain as if it were a small animal, then cut 2 leaves and laid them tenderly in the basket. Finally, she gathered some chickweed and a sprig of wild thyme, and as she rose, the hem of her dress brushed the grass with the sound of quiet approval. The apple branch quivered with outrage. "Child," it called in a voice only trees and angels can hear, "do you not see? Above you, the sky wearing flowers. Why stoop for weeds when you could reach for me?" The girl did not answer, but the wind, who listens to everything and repeats only what helps, whispered her thoughts upward. "I go to visit the sick widow by the mill. The wind breathed into the blossoms. Her poor chest wheezes like a bellows. The plantain leaf, laid on linen, will soothe the cough. The chickweed will cool the fever. The wild thyme in hot water will loosen sorrow from her lungs. The dandelions will make yellow in her room as if the sun had decided not to leave. The apple branch recoiled. Medicines and pity, it said. And what of beauty? What of refinement? Again the wind translated the girl's silence. For beauty I will take them as they are, unchanged. I cannot put a tree in a cottage, nor steal a bough from its place when the fruit is yet to come. A single violet in a drinking glass, a loop of ground ivy around it, golden dandelions making a crown. Such a humble bouquet will teach the small room the manners of spring. The woman will see them and remember her girlhood, when the fields did not ask permission to be happy. The branch, startled, shook its petals like a bird shakes rain. A crown of dandelions, a garland of commonness, when she might have had a spray of me. A robin on a neighboring bough cocked his head. Hush, he chirped gently. Your time will come, lovely one. We birds love you for shade and for stories. After your flowers, apples. After apples, winter, then rest. Each thing in its turn. Turn? The branch snapped. I do not turn. The world turns toward me. The robin, being a bird and therefore wiser than many who have read books, flew off to feed a mouth in a mud cup under the eaves. Day went on like a well-told tale, without hurry and without lag. Sunlight made lace through the leaves. A bee rehearsed for a recital of honey. A child laughed at nothing and therefore at everything. In the afternoon the sky gathered its skirts and a small rain stepped in with the light tread of someone who intends to leave the room better than she found it. Each drop kissed a blossom and made it more itself. The girl returned at dusk, her basket empty now, her steps lighter than when she had entered. She paused beneath the apple tree and looked up. What a fragrance, she said aloud to the evening, or perhaps to the maker of evenings. Soon the little ones will come here with their pockets, and even the poorest will have the taste of a holiday. The branch felt a blush it could not see. So I am remembered, it thought, and love slipped a cushion under its self-regard. Night took the orchard soft-footed. The stars peered through the lattice of branches. Moths wrote pale sentences in the air. On the stone wall the ground ivy cooled, the dandelions shut their sunny mouths, and the violet slept with the face of a child who has forgiven her day. Morning came like a kindly verdict, and with it arrived a visitor. The village schoolmaster, stiff with thoughts, carrying a book under his arm and wonder in his pocket. He was fond of children, and of questions that do not mind being answered twice. He walked with a purpose that made time polite to him. At the gate he met the miller's boy who carried the girl's now empty drinking glass. The widow slept, the boy said, with the smell of thyme in the room and the yellow looking at her. She smiled in her sleep. I saw it. Then he ran on before anyone could decide that happiness must not be discussed in the morning. The schoolmaster stood under the apple tree and removed his hat as if greeting a priest. Glory be, he murmured. And that is an education. He drew a small knife and cut a single broken twig, the kind the wind breaks to save a limb, and examined the bloom. 5 petals like the pages of a simple book, a crown of stamens the color of modesty, a heart green with promise. He turned and looked down at the weeds by the wall, the little parliament of tough, kind plants, and smiled. You too, he said, schoolfellows. The apple branch, hearing itself compared to the ground's rough children, tossed its flowers with an indignant shiver. A petal loosed itself and went drifting like an unregretted word. What fellowship can there be, it protested, between us and them? We are the orchard's nobility. You are the orchard's future, said the tree's trunk in a voice the branch had rarely bothered to remember. The trunk spoke slowly, as trees must, because they measure meaning against seasons, not seconds. A noble future cannot despise the present that nourishes it. We draw from the same earth. The small humble ones keep it soft and cool. Their roots break the crust that rainfall cannot break. Their leaves shade the little creatures who work where we cannot. When the sun burns too harshly, the dandelion holds it and the violet keeps a cool secret. We are tall, because they are many. The branch bit back a retort, for how does one argue with the very memory of sap? It was at noon, when brightness stands still long enough to reassure everyone they are not mistaken about the day, that a girl and a little boy, another pair, came with a twig basket that had known many Aprils. They walked directly to the abandoned corner by the wall. "Not the orchard?" the little boy asked, eyeing the blizzard of apple blossoms above. "Those are not for us to take," the girl said. "They belong to the bees and the weather and to autumn." "But this," he said, pointing to the ground ivy, which made little purple laughter among the stones. "This," she nodded, "belongs to anyone with gentle hands." She showed him how to pinch the stem above a new shoot, so the plant would not mind the taking. She made him smell the violet. "See? It makes thinking quiet." She wove a loop of dandelion stems and crowned him, and he stood very still because some instincts do not require lessons. They filled their small basket with medicine and modesty and color. Then they set a single dandelion at the foot of the apple trunk in an odd little act that was both play and prayer. "For the tree," the girl said, "so it knows we are friends." The proud branch felt a heat in its heartwood that was not the sun. It looked down, really looked, at the green tangle it had called weeds. It noticed the way the ground ivy cooled the stones and invited ants to their errands, the way the plantain made a flat place like a stepping stone for beetles to cross, the way the dandelion turned its face to the smallest cloud to catch a drip for the thirsty, the way the violet kept its perfume low, where sorrow sits. "Friends," said the branch so quietly that only the trunk and the listening wind could hear. Days multiplied like sparrows. The orchard fattened its shadows. Petals snowed down, and the tree wore green work clothes in place of bridal white. Where each flower had been, a small honest promise swelled. Children came as the girl had prophesied, with pockets and laughter. They ate apples in September with the greed of saints. And because apples remember, the branch did not think of itself as a crown. It thought of itself as a hand. Autumn burned and blessed. Winter wrote its clean script across every limb. The weeds slept without shame. When spring returned, and it always does, even for those who doubt it, new blossoms opened, and the proud branch, less proud now, watched the gate for humble footsteps. It welcomed the girl's basket as a guest, and shook down a little snow of perfume to make her path kind. One afternoon, after a rain that had washed everything as if the world were a dish to be dried and put away, an old woman came slowly up the lane with the careful dignity of those who have carried more years than luggage. She sat on the wall to rest. The ground ivy touched her ankle. The dandelion lit its candle at her feet. The violet breathed. She looked up at the apple branch and smiled. "Thank you for last year," she said, and it understood, without wind to translate, that she meant the fruit that had been soup, and the shade that had been memory, and the beauty that had been courage. Then she looked down and touched the weed world as a grandmother touches the hair of a sleeping child. "And thank you for always," she added. The branch bowed. It did not break. Bending is not breaking. Toward evening, the schoolmaster passed again with his wide pockets of wonder. He paused beneath the tree, lifted his hat as before, and spoke as if dismissing a class. "Let us recite what we have learned. Flowers that worldlings call weeds are often prayers with roots. Small things heal, large things feed. Each has its day. None may despise the other's hour." He looked up at the bough. "And you, Sir Branch?" "I have learned," the branch whispered in the speech of sap, "that usefulness without humility is arrogance, and beauty without kindness is noise." "Excellent," said the schoolmaster. "You will pass." When night again spread her calm handwriting across the orchard, the apple branch watched the stars through its leaves and listened to the tiny, busy lives below. It felt the trunk's slow pride, which is nothing like vanity. It felt its fruit growing weighty and sweet. It felt too a gratitude that made it lighter than blossom time, the gratitude of one who has been corrected without being shamed. If you wish for a moral, as our old story friend would have given you neatly folded and tied with a ribbon, take this one and wear it like a sprig of ground ivy behind your ear. Moral: do not despise the little flowers that bloom at your feet while you perfume the air above them. The fruit you mean to give is fed by roots you do not see, and the poorest blossom may yet crown a life with kindness. Bending to honor the humble does not lower the noble. It raises both. In a city of steep roofs and narrow streets where snow in winter drew white stitches across the shingles, and summer hung laundry like small flags of surrender, there lived a boy in the topmost room of a crooked house. The window of that room opened to the sky in a slant, and from it one could see an entire theater of clouds, fat caravans of noon, crimson ships of evening, and the frail silver nets the moon cast over chimney pots. The boy's name was Mads, though his mother sometimes called him my brave one, and sometimes nothing at all, only touched his hair as if smoothness could mend bones. His legs would not carry him. They had tried when he was a toddler, brave, wobbly marches from bed to chair to mother's apron, but the bones were bent and the sinews stubborn, and by the time the alphabet had learned his name from his lips, walking had become a story other children told. He did not protest. Children protest until they discover they are loved. Once they know that, they accept what the days offer and make games out of what remains. Mads made a garden. It was not a garden as princes mean. No marble nymphs or clipped hedges that look like tax collectors. It was a wooden box his mother found at the market, the kind oranges arrive in. He set it on the windowsill and filled it with soil, begged from the coal yard where a strip of earth persisted by accident. In that box he planted bits of the world. A snippet of ivy persuaded from the neighbor's wall, with permission and a smile. A geranium cutting the washerwoman gave him. A rinse of moss taken from the gutter with an apology to the sparrows who had considered it. And later a seed that floated from a dandelion's white whisper and decided to become something yellow on purpose. Every morning Mads tended his square of creation. He talked to it in the voice we save for small animals and enormous truths. He turned the box so that each leaf shared in the sun like fair children at a table. In winter he tucked scraps of wool around the stems the way his mother tucked blankets around him. "There you are," he would say. "We are alive again." Across the street stood a grander house with straight windows that rehearsed dignity. In those windows appeared each spring a regiment of potted hyacinths and lilies, rows of pink, white, blue, and gold, each pot a crowned head bending politely to the street. Ladies in fur and gentlemen with walking sticks passed below, nodding at the flowers as if at acquaintances of rank. Mads loved those windows. He made friends with them as one makes friends with books. At a distance, but faithfully. He knew when the lilies were tired and when the hyacinths were boasting. He waved to them when rain made little rivers on the glass between them and the world. He had another entertainment, too. A toy theater he built from paper and patience. He cut arches and balconies from old pastry boxes, painted curtains with the stub of a crayon, and glued sequins, rescued from the floor of the dressmaker's shop, to make chandelier spangles. He fashioned actors from clothespins, a king with a gold crown made from a candy wrapper, a queen in a skirt whose hem was a sentence from an old newspaper, a soldier who had once been a wooden peg for drying stockings, a fairy cut from a broken spoon's handle, which lent her a dignity none could deny. His plots were simple, and always rescuing someone. Children, like angels, prefer happy endings even when they know better. On Sundays, when bells braided the air with permission to hope, the woman from the grand house sometimes crossed the street and climbed the crooked stairs. She came not as charity, which is a coin tossed and quickly forgotten, but as neighborliness, which sits and stays. She brought Mads a small sweet, or a packet of seeds, or a stack of newspapers with their seriousness outshone by the pictures. "You must tell me how your theater goes," she would say, and he would light the candle stub that stood for chandelier and make the clothespins bow and flirt and fight until they remembered forgiveness. The lady would laugh and then look down at her hands, as if the child had made something in her bloom. His mother sewed buttonholes and darned stockings until her fingers learned to sleep standing up. When she was home, she sang. It was not the kind of singing the city paid for. No trills, no fussy climbing of notes. It was the sturdy sort, the melody a mother hums to keep a roof from worrying. Sometimes she did not sing. Then Mads watched her from the corner of his eye and used his theater to cover the silence with applause. Seasons turned like pages. In spring, a robin nested beneath the tile near Mads's window, and he learned the timetable of hunger from the pale yellow mouths lifted up. In summer, the square of sun that came each day at 8 o'clock marched across the floor and climbed the wall as if it had stairs we could not see. In autumn, when fog put its shoulder against the houses to push them closer together, the grand windows opposite filled again with lilies and hyacinths, and Mads's breath made little stars on the glass as he directed his theater toward warmth. One Christmas, the world arrived in their room. A tree, not large but entirely committed, stood in a chipped pot near the stove. The woman from across the street had sent it with 2 candles and a packet of sugared almonds. The grocer tied a red ribbon at the top after selling it for half what it cost. The butcher had slipped a sausage into the basket and pretended the cat had done it. Mads held the candle while his mother wrapped the tree's foot with an old shawl, and when the tiny flames were lit, the impossible was true. The room looked rich. He set his theater beside its branches, and the clothespins performed a play about shepherds and stars. Even the stove listened. When the candles finished their sentences, they went out with the tidy sigh of those who know they have done enough. "See," his mother said, "we can keep a holiday like the grand folk." "We keep it better," said Mads, "because ours stands closer to our hearts." He coughed more that winter. The cough seemed to belong to the room, like the chair, like the box of earth, like the curtain nodded to let in light. Something always there. He did not complain. Complaints enlarge themselves in small rooms. He let his theater speak for him. The fairy brought a leaf from the geranium to lay on the king's brow. The soldier stood guard with his wooden peg courage. The queen sang, and if the melody trembled, who could blame it? Across the street, a child, pale and serious, appeared for the first time in the grand windows and watched Mads watching the flowers. She pressed 2 fingers to the glass. Mads pressed 2 to his. That was their handshake, repeated many evenings until the cold took them both inside. When spring returned, the city came out like laundry, shaking and shining. The lady from across the street brought seeds wrapped in newspaper. Nasturtiums, she said, because they climb like brave ideas. Sweet peas, because they remember to smell the way childhood does. And a packet of marigolds for stubborn gold. She also brought a story. The serious child in the windows was her niece, left with her after an illness. She has not gone out for long, the lady confessed, and does not care for company, but she cares for your waving. You would think 2 fingers on glass could be medicine. Sometimes, Mads said, and did not add that his fingers had often been his feet. He planted the seeds with such ceremony, you would have thought a prince was to be buried there and rise again crowned. He explained to the box how it must behave. "We share," he said. "If the nasturtium grows wild, it must spare a corner for the violet. If the marigold grows jealous, it must look at the geranium and learn patience." The green obeyed. It usually does when commanded kindly enough. Soon the window was a framed invitation. Orange laughter, gold coins, small white stars, tendrils writing poems only bees can read. In summer, a miracle arrived dressed as ordinary work, a chair with wheels. The carpenter at the corner, whose son had been scolded by Mads's mother for spitting at the cat, had built it from a broken pram and 2 chair legs, with handles for the mother to push. He brought it up the stairs with the embarrassed fierceness of men who were not asked. "It will hold," he said. "I used the good screws." And it did hold. Down the stair, through the door, into the street, where the world ran at Mads like a crowd of cousins. The wheelchair became a boat, then a carriage, then a sled in winter when the carpenter's son tied a rope to help on the hills. Mads learned the names of dogs and the schedule of street organs. He discovered the river, which had always been there and now had the courtesy to be seen. He discovered dirt that did not belong to his box and the exact sound a chestnut makes when it falls from a tree onto hat felt. He discovered the niece in the grand window had dimples that only appeared when she tried not to smile. She came down the steps at last on a day sweet peas, scented like a letter from a friend. "I am Liv," she said. "I know your garden. It writes to me." From then on there were 2 chairs beneath the window some afternoons. His with wheels, hers with a blanket. They traded pockets. He gave her a marigold. She gave him a folded drawing. His theater with stars so carefully stippled it seemed to glow. They told each other small truths, which are easier to carry than large ones and nourish just as well. When she could not come, she lit a candle in the upstairs window at dusk. He answered with the candle from the Christmas box, carried like a tradition. Autumn came with its tidy brooms. The green sighed and put by its coins. Mads coughed again, this time as if something had decided he should not keep it any longer. It tired him to lift the clothespin soldier. He taught the robin's children to take crumbs from the sill because it made his breath less lonely. "Perhaps I am a winter plant," he told his mother, and smiled so she would not be afraid. She sang when she could, and watched the flame of the stove as if it were the face of a doctor. The lady from across the street came more often. The niece sent notes. "I am learning to breathe without counting. Do you?" And he wrote back, "I count the clouds." The first snow brought silence with it, as it always does. The kind of silence that is not emptiness but a clean page. The city settled. The window grew cold pearls. Mads slept more. When he woke, the world had the tenderness of a story told beside a bed. One night he asked his mother to set the theater upon the sill and to put the fairy in the center, and the soldier at the door. "It is a guarding," he said. "Against what?" she asked, though she knew, for mothers always know and ask anyway to give the child the dignity of saying it. "Against being alone," he answered, quite content. He slept then, the deep kind, going down as a diver goes down, sure of surfacing. And when the morning came he was very light, and his breath very far away, as if it had gone down the stair to fetch something and had forgotten to return. His mother touched his hair, and then not his hair but the air above it, as we do when what we love grows delicate. The stove's fire made the smallest bow. Across the street a candle burned in the window before the dawn. When the carpenter brought the men to carry the small beloved body down the crooked stairs, the chairs with wheels stood empty beside each other and looked like punctuation marks, one a question, one an exclamation, at the end of a sentence that had been simple and perfect. The lady from across the street wrapped the little box of earth in a shawl and took it to her windows, adding it to the regiments of lilies and hyacinths. In the corner of the box a nasturtium leaf had dared the frost and kept 1 coin of summer. The winter passed like a careful hand over a page. On the first good day of spring, Liv, the niece with the dimples, placed 2 fingers on the glass and waited. When no answering fingers came, she did something better. She took the box garden down to the stoop, set a little stool beside it, and invited every child who passed to touch a leaf, smell a blossom, take a seed. "It is from a friend," she said. He liked it when small things became large in the heart. Later, when bells braided air again, the priest said words, clean ones, without embroidery. The carpenter stood at the back with his hat held like a fragile bird. The grocer and butcher came, and the washerwoman, and the dressmaker who had lost sequins to a chandelier long ago. The lady from across the street brought lilies. Liv carried a marigold and the fairy cut from the spoon handle. She placed the fairy on the coffin for a moment and then put it in her pocket, because fairy work is not finished. That night, upon the crooked roof, a robin sang. In the grand windows opposite, hyacinths leaned toward the street, and the box garden rode on their scents like a small boat among bright sails. The city breathed. And somewhere, if your heart has learned how to listen, The clothespin actors bowed to an audience we cannot see, and a soldier stood guard at a door that opens both ways, and a fairy placed a leaf upon a brow and called it spring. Moral: strength is not measured in steps, but in what we tend from where we are. Some lives travel far without moving. They wheel entire neighborhoods closer to kindness and leave behind gardens that know the way to bloom in other hands. At the edge of a country lane beside a ditch where rainwater kept a silver secret, there lived a little daisy. She was not much to look at least that is what important flowers would have said. Her stem was short, her leaves were plain, her white petals circled a golden eye that shone like a tiny sun with no need of sky. She did not stand in a garden. No gardener counted her among his triumphs. Carts rolled by her all day. Boots marched past, unaware. Yet each morning when the real sun rose, the daisy opened her small crown and greeted the light with a joy that made the ditch feel like a river and the road like a promise. She loved everything: the chill before dawn, the warm breath of noon, the whispering of grass that had not learned to be proud. She loved even the dust that fell on her leaves, because the wind brought it, and she loved the wind. When clouds traveled like great white ships overhead, she waved her thin stem as if to signal safe passage. When rain came, she drank as though it were a blessing poured directly into her heart. "How rich I am," she said every morning, "to have been put exactly here, where the sun can find me." Not far from the ditch stood a garden, and within the garden the noble flowers rehearsed their importance. Tulips held themselves like painted goblets. Roses practiced their slow applause, petal upon petal, swelling with perfumes that expected return favors. Peonies rustled in complicated dresses, and carnations, frilled as if with laughter, watched the world through eyelash edges. The daisy admired them all. She never envied. Envy needs walls. She lived in open air. Across the field a lark rose each day with dew still clinging to the threads of the world. He shot upward like a lifted thought, and from the height he stitched the sky to the earth with song. It was not a complicated song, just a bright ribbon of praise. The daisy, hearing it, turned her little face up until it ached with happiness. "Brother," she whispered to the lark, though she had never met him, "how brave your voice is. Sing for me, who cannot fly." One morning the lark came lower than usual, skimming the grass so near that the daisy felt a flick of wind from his wings. He saw the small white star by the ditch and settled beside her. "Good day," he chirped. "You look at the sun as I do." "And I listen to you as if you were the sun's own messenger," said the daisy. "Please, sing again." He did, for a lark is generous where he is happy. He sang of blue distances and the sweetness that rises from new-cut hay, of insects with armor like tiny knights, of invisible ladders on which the heart may climb without tiring. The daisy trembled with pleasure. When he paused, she said shyly, "Your song makes even this ditch feel glorious." "Your joy echoes it," said the lark. "A song is only full when someone listens that way." He lifted himself and flew upward until he became a speck of music, and then the music itself. The day warmed. Children came. They were two boys with caps pushed back on their heads like careless crowns. One carried a small wooden cage, the other a knife too sharp for his manners. "We'll catch the lark," said the first, "and teach him to sing in our room. Mother's canary has grown lazy." The second nodded, already searching for a patch of turf to lift for a baited trap. His quick eyes fell upon the daisy. "What luck?" he said. "A bit of green and a flower to make it pretty. Larks are fools for pretty." He thrust the knife under the earth and gentled up a circle of grass with the daisy in its center. She felt the ground loosen under her as a tooth loosens in a child's gum. Not pain at first, only astonishment. Lifted from the ditch, she swayed in the boy's hand, the roots of her life damp and vulnerable in the air. "See?" said the boy. "A fine lure." He set the little circle of ground in the field with a noose of horsehair bent like a question just above it. Now we wait. By afternoon the room was heat and quiet. The daisy felt the sun through the window like a memory rather than a kiss. "Hold on," she whispered. I'm still here. We have light enough between us for another hour." The lark stood on her patch of green and bent his head. She felt the brush of his breast against her petals as light as the shadow of a thought, and it filled her with a love so tender, she forgot fear again. He tried to sing once more. 2 high notes, pure as the first morning of the world, floated up and faded like bubbles touched by air. When the boys returned at dusk, they remembered the lark because they remembered the bragging. "Sing!" they cried, rattling the cage. He lifted his head in obedience to a command that had once come from God and found no strength. His eyes were bright and far away, as if he watched a field where he could not land. He swayed, steadied himself with a last courtesy, and was still. The little daisy understood before they did. She closed her petals, not to sleep, but to hold grief. The boys stared, first surprised, then annoyed. "Stupid bird," one said. "He should have sung." The mother came, wiped her hands on her apron, and looked. A soft sigh left her, the sigh women make when the world disappoints them in ways that will not stop dinner from being served. "Take him," she said gently, "to the yard. Bury him under the hedge. He was a singing thing. He deserves a bit of earth." The boys obeyed, less from reverence than from boredom. They carried cage and turf outside, tipped the clod under the bush, and shook the daisy loose without seeing her. She fell into the path and lay there, roots in the air, petals dusted. One boy nudged her with his shoe. "A weed," he said, and did not know he had named a saint. They went in to eat. Twilight gathered like a shawl. The yard cooled. Beyond the fence, a real lark rose, one with a sky for a ceiling, and poured his evening praise across roof and hedge. The little daisy listened, bruised and thirsty, and in that listening found herself whole. The song grieved and comforted her at once, as true songs do. She thought of the captive lark's 2 high notes. She thought of the ditch that had been a river. She thought of the boys and forgave them because they were boys. A drop of water from the eaves fell upon her, and another, and then a soft rain came, the kind that steps carefully where there has been pain. The daisy's roots tasted wet earth. With all her small might she burrowed down, seeking the dark kindness that holds the world up. She found it. She stood. She opened again. Not like morning, not full, but enough to be counted among the living. By morning the boys had forgotten the lark entirely. New games had arrived with the sunshine. Only the hedge remembered, and the daisy, and the sky that keeps all songs in trust. The daisy lifted her face and gave back her yellow, as if it had never failed her. She had no audience but a beetle and a breeze, and they were audience enough. Across the lane the garden flowers opened in their practiced beauty, and the lark above, another one, perhaps the same, sang, free and multiplied in the listening air. The daisy lived her days as daisies do, completely, briefly, honestly. If anyone had asked her what she had learned, she might have said this: that happiness is not a garden wall or a golden cage, but a sun one can see and a song one can bear. She might have said that love is best proved by staying bright in small places and by keeping company with those who suffer, even when one is only a flower by a ditch. No one asked, and so she only shone. As for the boys, time did its custom. It kept them, then changed them. One of them, years later, would pause at a bird cage in a market and feel inexplicably sad. He would buy no bird that day. He would walk home by the lane and notice, for the first time, the brave faces of daisies under the hedge. He would not know why he tipped his hat, and if a moral must be planted here, as Hans would have planted it, neat as a bean in spring, let it be simple as the flower that teaches it. Moral: do not prize a song so much that you steal its sky, nor despise a small life because it blooms by a ditch. Freedom is the breath of joy, kindness the water that keeps it alive. The darning needle. She came from a velvet-lined case and therefore believed she was born for velvet-lined destinies. Silk, at the very least, the darning needle would say, gleaming along her polished length, her eyes small and elegant as a noble lady's blink. She lay among a regiment of pins and needles of all sizes, coarse sail needles, stout carpet needles, bashful little sharps for hems, while the thimble dozed like a fat general, and the scissors shone with cold authority. "I am the most refined implement in this drawer," the darning needle declared. "Observe my eye, so delicate only the finest silk thread can pass. Observe my steel, so slender it's practically a thought. I am intended for lace, for embroidery, for bridal veils that must not remember being touched." The thimble, dented by honest labor, chuckled. "You'll meet stockings before you meet veils," he said. "This household has more holes than weddings." "Vulgar work," sniffed the darning needle. "I should like the honor of attaching pearls to an archbishop's sleeve or gathering moonlight into a queen's hem." The scissors snapped once, just to remind everyone how quickly illusions can be tailored, and the pin, who had only ever dreamed of being noticed, murmured, "How beautiful you are." "Quite," said the darning needle, and felt her steel grow brighter from the compliment. That afternoon the drawer opened, and the seamstress's neat fingers plucked her up. The darning needle tingled with anticipation. "At last," she thought. "Silk." "Stockings," said the seamstress, practical as gravity. "We'll mend them before Sunday." The stocking lay across the woman's knee like a sigh that had decided to be useful. The darning needle winced but steeled herself. "A small humiliation," she thought. "Greatness often begins with disguise." The seamstress threaded her, with sturdy cotton, not silk, and pressed her into the wool with a thimble's firm kiss. The work was honest, brisk, without ceremony. The darning needle sailed in and out, not through brocade or velvet, but through the warm, homely weave that had known the inside of boots. She would have protested, but motion is a language, and she soon learned to speak it fluently. In spite of herself, she admired her own skill. How neatly she drew torn edges together, how smoothly she closed the gap. "Well," she conceded, "if one must stoop, one should do it exquisitely." Just then, the seamstress's little brother burst through the door like weather with legs, tripped over the rug, and jostled the work. The thimble skittered, the stocking slid, the darning needle struck the chair arm, and snapped, clear through, just behind the delicate eye. The thread sprang free like a freed idea. The needle felt herself become two, a sharp without sight and an eye without purpose. "Broken," cried the seamstress, genuinely sorrowful, for needles do not grow on hedges, and she set the poor creature aside on the table, intending to mourn later. A broken needle grows lighter or proud, seldom anything in between. This one chose pride. "I am now even finer," she told herself. "Look at me, so rarefied I no longer submit to thread. I shall be worn as a jewel." When the seamstress returned with a new needle, her sleeve brushed the old one. The darning needle slid from the table, dropped to the floor, and disappeared between two floorboards with the quiet of a secret. It was not the kind of disappearance great ladies prefer. Darkness breathed up at her. Dust drifted. Somewhere a mouse conducted its muffled affairs. "An exclusive retreat," the darning needle said, because pride is best kept well supplied with adjectives. Only the most select objects dwell under floorboards. Days passed. At last a spring cleaning pried the boards up, and a broom swept her with a dignified indifference into the yard. She landed in a crack of the paving stones, thin and bright as a remark that was too sharp for the company. Now came the rain. It fell like a thorough apology, washing the world clean of its winter mutterings. The darning needle lay still, and allowed herself to be carried along a little gutter that had ambitions of being a stream. Bits of straw bobbed past. A fragment of blue paper sailed like a toy brigantine. 2 ants crossed together on a twig with the courage of sailors, and a shard of green bottle flashed once before catching on a stone. "Emerald," said the darning needle, approving the company. "This is more like it." The gutter narrowed, and swept her into a grating of iron bars. Beneath, the city's secret river muttered to itself. A boy with a stick stirred the flowing treasure for sport. "Look, a silver fish," he cried, spotting the glint of the darning needle. Down went the stick, up came the needle to the daylight again. "Ah," she thought, "a rescuer." "Not a fish at all," said the boy, disappointed. "Only a needle." He stuck her, carelessness posing as ingenuity, into his cap as a plume. For a brief, swaggering hour she rode above a street market, eels coiling in wooden tubs, apples piled like red arguments, ribbons fluttering, soap stacked in obedient rectangles, laughter, bargaining, and bread. The darning needle, who had never traveled, was almost delighted. "I am a decoration," she congratulated herself. "It is what I was made for." But boys have short memories and quicker hands. When a kite tugged his attention skyward, he removed the needle from his cap, and not knowing where he put anything until he had lost it, tucked her behind his ear. Later he scratched that ear and sent the darning needle tumbling into the street again. A cartwheel missed her by an inch. A boot found her by a miracle. The boot kept walking. She lay there, offended at the sky, until a maid came out to shake a rug and scold a sparrow. Seeing the needle, she picked it up. "A darning needle! What luck! I can use you for a hairpin." "Oh ho!" thought the darning needle. "An elevation." The maid thrust her through a coil of hair with domestic enthusiasm. Pride gave the needle a little shiver. "At the very top," she said, surveying roof lines from her new throne. For a moment there was wind and the smell of sun on linen. For a moment she actually enjoyed being useful again, though she would not have called it that. But the maid's sweetheart arrived with the stealth of love and the clumsiness of young boots. He kissed her. She pretended to be cross. They turned, laughed, tussled. The needle slid from her hair as a star slides from a careless sky and fell into the yard, point first into the mud. Mud has no opinion of mirrors. The darning needle felt the cool embrace seep along her length. "A mud bath," she said faintly, because faintness begins when adjectives fail. Very fashionable at certain spas. A dog came by and wagged a polite splash upon her. "A wave from a beast," she muttered. "Still, one must mingle." The day darkened. Night argues for humility. She began to lose. In the morning the sun dried the yard to a cracked smile. A servant swept. The broom found her again and pushed her toward a corner where rain spouts conspire. "We gather," said a dead leaf. "Do you belong?" "Everywhere I go becomes exclusive," replied the darning needle. There in the corner she met the shard of green bottle the gutter had introduced the day before. He lay winking in the light. "We are cousins," he said, "both broken, both brilliant." "I am not broken," she retorted, "only refined." "Refined," the glass agreed amiably, "is often what broken calls itself when it doesn't wish to sweep." He caught a sunbeam and sent it across her. "If you like, I shall be your emerald." They would have made a strange brooch, the two of them, if the broom had not returned to scatter the club. Swept once more into the gutter, the darning needle tumbled into a puddle where a little girl was launching a fleet made of bark and imagination. "A mast!" cried the girl, seizing the needle. She thrust the needle upright into a scrap of bark and set it afloat. The darning needle, unaccustomed to such democracy of purpose, quivered as the small ship wobbled bravely away. "I am a queen's scepter," she told herself, and if the scepter sprang a leak and sank, that was surely the scepter's fault, not hers. When the bark went down, she slipped from it and lodged again in the grating. Time, whose thread is invisible and needs no needle, pulled the days along. Rust began where pride never does, quietly. A slim film of brown traced itself like an old scar along her brightness. Gold, she decided. I am gilded now. A rat passed, glanced with contempt at her poetry, and continued his business of knowing the city through its crumbs. Autumn wrote its quick letters on the air. Leaves fled their posts and whirled into the gutters like small, graceful resignations. One leaf, broad and mottled, caught on the bars and made a raft. The darning needle rested there. A carriage stopped beside the curb. A lady within cried, "Oh, my locket!" Her chain had snapped. The locket, round as a memory, fell into the gutter and came to rest on the raft beside the needle. They lay shoulder to shoulder for a breath's astonishment. "I am a locket," said the locket, opening her tiny mouth the way love opens when no one looks. Within, a miniature face smiled in perfect ignorance of mud. "Once I contain a beloved, now I contain rain." "How exquisite," said the darning needle, unable to tell whether she mocked. "I am a needle of distinction." "Were," murmured the locket, "because truth is a metal too." The driver recovered the treasure with a hooked stick. Up went the locket, away went the carriage. The raft broke, the darning needle spun alone again. She pretended she had refused the invitation. Winter came. Snow made charity of all surfaces. Children ran with red hands, scuffing purpose into whiteness. One boy, having sucked his stick of barley sugar to a point, pushed it through the snow and skewered the darning needle. "A toothpick," he cried with the inventions of poverty. He cleaned his teeth with her, and because she was steel and had once been proud, she bore it like a fate with a complicated lineage. When the boy had had his fun, he flipped her into the air. She flashed once, a fallen brilliance, and fell into the crack beside the pump where the ground is busy remembering water. There she lay, the world narrowed to iron, stone, and the polite gossip of drips. It would have ended there, except that endings like to dress as beginnings. In spring, when everything climbs to its feet again, a swallow came down to drink. Her wings wrote cursive on the air. Her throat wore a blue ribbon that no hand had tied. She sipped, cocked her head, and noticed the small glint among the damp. She lifted the darning needle gently in her beak. "A pin," she told herself. "The swallow's language is forgiving. How nicely it will hold the straw of my nest." Up she flew, under eaves into shadow. She tucked the needle among the weave. Below, a pair of hands, those of the seamstress herself, hung fresh linen to the breeze. She did not look up. She did not know she had lost and would not miss what she had lost. The nest settled. The darning needle felt the tremor of small hearts against her side as eggs became birds that believed the sky had invented them. "Ah," she said, and for the first time her voice had no embroidery on it. "I am useful again." The nest fell in a storm later, as nests and plans do, but by then the fledglings had flown, and the darning needle had learned the short, immense lesson of being held among living things. A child found the wreckage and salvaged what looked like a pin. She stuck it into the hem of a doll's dress. The doll went to tea in a cracked saucer. The pin held the hem from tripping over pretend pastries and a thimble of milk. It was nothing like pearls on an archbishop, and it was finally enough. Years turned. Steel forgets more slowly than hearts. Once more she was lost. Once more she was found. Once more she held. Once more she was set aside. Rust freckled her. Her point softened. No one would have accused her of beauty now. No one would have called her refined. But if you looked closely, you might still see in her length a little shine, like a truth remembered even after vanity has left the room. And if a moral must be threaded through this story, as our dear Hans often threaded one through the hem of his tales, let it be drawn tight and plain. Moral: vanity calls every fall refinement, but service teaches the better name. The smallest tool is noble when it mends what is torn. A life is never finer than when it holds quietly where love would otherwise unravel. The drop of water. On the windowsill of a narrow, book-crammed room stood a glass tumbler that had seen much of life. It had held milk and cherries, flowers and coins, and once a small goldfish who had learned that the world is circular. Now it held only a clear inch of rain, caught that afternoon from the eaves when the sky remembered how to be generous. Outside, evening folded the roofs. Inside, a lamp burned like a patient thought. The room belonged to an old scholar whose eyebrows had grown into wise little wings. His hair did not remember its original color. His coat did not remember its original seams, but his eyes remembered everything. On the table lay a magnifying glass that had traveled with him from youth to comfort, from comfort to hunger, from hunger back to this quiet season in which questions were companions and bread was enough. He loved the infinitely small as other men love the distant, the way a leaf writes veins finer than music, how a grain of dust is a planet with gravity enough to collect a sunbeam. He was not famous. Fame hurries by the door of patience. But he was happy. A child often visited, Liv from across the landing, who had the alertness of a robin and the knees of an explorer. That evening she came in with pockets full of sky, 2 shards of blue bottle, 3 seeds with little parachutes, and a button that, if you held it to the light, believed itself to be a diamond. She put her findings on the table and looked at the glass of water. "Is it only water?" she asked. "Only," said the scholar, smiling, "which means everything. Sit, and we'll see." He set the magnifying glass above the tumbler and slid a piece of black paper under the glass to make the light tell the truth. Then he lifted the lamp and angled it so that the drop nearest the rim was lit like a theater. "Watch," he whispered. Liv pressed her face close. The drop swelled under the glass, one clear world, round as an idea, full of motion no naked eye had guessed. A crescent of light curved across it like a silver road. Within that tiny globe specks moved, not specks at all now, but creatures, improbable and obvious at once. Little slippers, little wheels, little commas, busy becoming sentences. They bumped, darted, spun. Some had hairs that beat in rows, ferrying them along. Some had tails that whipped. Some stretched themselves like rubbery moons. "They are alive," Liv breathed. "As you are," said the scholar. "As the dust is not. We have stepped into a city where everyone is in a hurry." The creatures swarmed around a crumb that had fallen into the water when the sky delivered it. An invisible continent become mighty under glass. There they quarreled with passionate geometry, rearranged themselves into congregations, then exploded outwards to chase neighbors and shout with their small bodies what they could not shout with mouths. One tiny slipper thing jostled another and circled in triumph. Another bumped into a third, rolled, recovered, and in offense bumped 2 others to prove he could. A spiral being spun faster, as if scolding the entire world for not obeying the law of spirals. Liv laughed softly. "They're busy." "Indeed," said the scholar, "and as proud as kings." More drama presented itself. Upon a floating dust flake, 2 creatures clung like duelists on a raft. They pushed and pulled, flared their tiny fringes, and, this is not too grand a word, raged. Elsewhere, a congregation formed about a clear bubble which was at once temple and throne. The worshippers bowed, there is no other word, and having bowed enough, turned on their neighbors with precise indignation, as if to prove that devotion gives permission to hate. A little wheel creature that had wandered alone in a patient ellipse found itself crowded now and suddenly important. It changed direction and pretended it had meant to do so all along. "They're like us," Liv said, startled. "Not like," the scholar corrected kindly. "We are like them, only louder." He lowered the glass a fraction. The entire world enlarged again, a kingdom ballooning to empire. "Watch the corner. That one is building." On the rim of a splinter, a being stretched a film and drew itself through, then stretched another as if weaving a door that opened to itself. The film quivered, tore, closed again. Another came, jostled, and started weaving a door on top of the first door. 2 more arrived to advise. Advice became argument. Argument turned to pushing. The door, neglected, melted. In the middle distance, an elegant bell-shaped creature rang without sound, fanning food toward its mouth with a gentle rhythm, while around it brutes hurled themselves at each other like drunken ideas. Liv frowned. They hurt each other. For reasons, the scholar said, which would sound noble if translated into our language. He replaced the magnifier with a stronger lens. That single edge of water now loomed like an ocean at a fingertip. The crescent of light became a burning moon. The creatures no longer seemed cute. Some were barbed, some armored, some wonderfully transparent so that one could see digesting crumbs become feces, become new crumbs for neighbors to covet. There are polite words for all of this, but nature does not speak them. "See there," the scholar murmured. "The little sundial, he who turns sunlight into supper. And there, two who have become four, who will become eight before this sentence ends. And there, the crocodile of this Nile." A rotifer, jaws like a tiny saw, grafted himself to a scrap and ground his invisible teeth. That which had been a speck smaller than thought entered him as if entering a house, then emerged less than it had been. He continued, serious, dignified, repetitive. A long, slender predator arrowed past, swallowed a slipper creature whole, paused as if thinking, then went on swallowing the next, and the next, as if responsibility had come upon him suddenly. Liv's hand crept across the table until it found the old man's sleeve. "I don't like it now," she whispered. "We seldom do," he said, "but keep watching. Truth is shy if we stare only at what flatters us." From the edge, a flagellate with the bravado of a carriage driver raced into a crowd and scattered them. A walled citizen stiffened and refused to be moved. A soft-bodied neighbor melted around him and tried to digest the refusal. The refusal failed to notice. A clear, perfect bubble rose like a hope and stuck to the glass where nothing could reach. Along the boundary, 1,000 tiny soldiers marched, cilia beating, the border between world and not world patrolled with perfect discipline. "There is so much of them," Liv said, a little breathless. "And they are so close to one another. It seems impossible they should feel alone." "That is one of the ways we are like them," the scholar said. He tilted the lamp. Heat brushed the tumbler. The tiny city quickened. Everything living moved more quickly, as if a rumor had entered and no one wished to be last to believe it. The bell animals rang faster. The wheel creatures spun themselves dizzy. The long arrow snapped at 3 prey when before it had eaten one. The congregation nearest the bubble built another temple upon it, then another upon that. They squealed soundlessly at neighbors who did not join, and neighbors squealed back. The duelists composed a third duel to commemorate the first two. "They are excited," Liv said. "They are warmed," the old man answered. "Warmed is often what excited calls itself when it has not yet become fever." He moved the lamp even nearer. The drop trembled very slightly. On its surface, a skin gathered as a thought gathers, a glimmer, a pressure, a decision. Within, the population became frantic. The crocodile ground faster. The dancers whirled. The solitary became suddenly communal and the communal suddenly solitary. A mite of detritus rolled. 20 creatures grabbed it at once. None would let go. The scholar adjusted the lens again so the border of the drop was a gleaming horizon. The skin burst. A bubble released a delicate sigh. A new skin gathered, another burst. Now the little ocean boiled. Not much, not violently, only in the manner of a city the day the drums sound. With each tiny pop, steam fled, the universe grew less and the citizens clutched harder at what remained. Liv pulled back. "Stop," she cried softly. "They will die." "They will," the scholar said. He withdrew the lamp. "As we do, but see what comes if we do not hurry them." Gradually the trembling eased. The popping slowed. The bell animals rang once more like modest clocks. The dancers remembered to pause between steps. The crocodile slowed his grind and appeared thoughtful. Creatures that had been enemies moments ago now drifted apart as if bored by the idea of hate. A single grain of something fell from the lamp black on the ceiling and entered the water like a star. Instantly it became a mountain, and a dozen citizens began to worship it because it was new. Liv leaned close again. Tears hung on her lashes, making their own lenses. "It is so much," she whispered, "to fit inside a drop." "An ocean fits in a tear," the scholar said. "Why not a city in a drop?" They watched until the lamp burned low. The small citizens went on doing what life does when no one watches. Striving, feasting, digesting, inventing reasons, founding monasteries on bubbles, initiating wars over crumbs, practicing grace by mistake. At last the old man set down the glass. "What have we seen?" he asked. Liv thought. "Ourselves," she said, "but smaller and honest." He smiled. "That is more than most see in a mirror." She glanced at the rainwater still in the tumbler, now an entire planet by comparison with the theater at the rim. She put her finger toward it, then pulled the finger back. "May I set them free?" she asked, embarrassed by the childishness of wanting to rescue what cannot be. "Do so," he said. "You cannot free them from life, but you can free them from our lamp." They went to the window. The scholar lifted the sash. The city leaned in, roofs, chimneys, a square where a fruit seller and a tailor were arguing like rotifers, a child skipping a rope like a wheel thing, a woman opening the door to a beggar with exactly the generosity of a Ciliate fanning food, a policeman moving with the solemnity of a walled cell. A breeze came, clean, with a rumor of fields. The old man poured the water onto the sill. It ran in a narrow stream, gathered as a bright lip, and fell into the night to join larger gatherers. "They will be carried to a gutter," he said, "to a drain, to the river, to the sea. Their descendants will quarrel there under other lamps." He closed the window gently. "We have not improved them, but perhaps we have improved ourselves." Liv stood on tiptoe and kissed his sleeve, which is where grateful children always kiss their elders. "Will you keep the drop?" she asked. "In a way," he said, tapping his temple. "And here." He touched his chest. "It is good to remember the small world when the large one persuades us it is the only one." She gathered her pocket treasures. The button diamond caught the lamp's last gold and returned it without envy. She ran out into the corridor, which echoed like a shell that remembers the sea. Left alone, the scholar washed the tumbler, set it upside down on a cloth, and sat with the magnifying glass in his lap. Through the window came the faint cries of the city that had not known it had been seen. He closed his eyes and, in the theater behind the lids, watched again the bubble temple, the duelists on their raft, the crocodile grinding his propriety, the bell animals ringing time, the congregation forgetting itself and remembering again. He laughed once softly, because it was either laugh or scold, and laughter is the gentler pedagogue. Rain returned during the night. In the morning, the tumbler was beaded with droplets like a crown. The old man lifted one carefully on the tip of a spoon and held it to the light. Life entered the room once more, invisible as always, manifold as ever. If you ask for a moral, as our old storyteller would have folded into the hem of his tale, let it be clear as water and as difficult to hold. Moral: when we magnify a drop, we do not discover monsters. We discover ourselves, multiplied. Beware the heat of our own lamps, ambition, fear, pride, for it makes small worlds boil, and great ones too. Look kindly, cool the glass, and remember, humility is the lens that keeps life from bursting. The Dryad. There was once a chestnut tree that had grown old without growing tired. It stood on a gentle hill where sheep dotted the grass like commas in a long, contented sentence. Its crown was a broad green thought that changed languages with the seasons. Spring's small anthem, summer's full chorus, autumn's glitter of coins, winter's quiet handwriting on bare twigs. Inside the tree lived a dryad, a soul shaped like a young woman, and a flame, whose breath was sap, and whose dreams were birds. She knew the names of rains and the footprints of winds. She knew the patience of stones and the kindness of moss. She had watched children become parents, and parents become stories. One year, the men came with measuring ropes and hats that meant decisions. They spoke of roads and progress, of a city that needed shade, of a grand exhibition where nations would set out their cleverness like dishes at a feast. The hill would be cut. The tree would be lifted. A miracle of iron claws and careful pulleys. and borne away to a boulevard where people could admire it between shop windows and low, glittering lamps. The chestnut trembled, and the dryad with it. Trees are not fond of traveling. Their maps are written in circles. Yet when the roots were cradled and the earth wrapped close, the dryad felt a thrill like new sap. She had loved the cattle bells and the cricket's tutor song. Now there would be music of a different sort, the murmuring of thousands of human leaves. She did not fight the move. She whispered to the beetles in her bark, who clung as sailors cling to a mast, and let herself be carried into the future. The city received the tree as the sea receives a river, vast, complicated, and not unkind. The chestnut was planted in a square where carriages rolled like dark waves, where cafes opened their golden mouths to laughter, where the air at dusk tasted of bread, perfume, and ideas. Men in bright uniforms glittered like beetles in sunlight. Women in silk crossed the pavement with the gravity of swans. Above, a domed hall rose, glass and iron in a marriage that made light a citizen. Inside, engines breathed, looms sang, and a fountain wrote silver on the air. At first, the dryad was afraid that the city would drown her. The ground was stone, not loam. The night shone. The stars were outnumbered by lamps. But the tree's roots found seams in the pavement where water collected. They found a forgotten pocket of dirt where a weed had been patient. The dryad felt the first sip of municipal rain and laughed. "I can live here," she told herself. "I will learn the language of wheels." City days opened like fans. A violinist played under her branches. A child slept in a pram, pink as a shell. A newspaper boy shouted headlines: wars, elections, a fallen acrobat. A poem that had made a politician blush. Lovers drew their initials on the bench beside the chestnut and promised to return in winter when the branches would be lace. The dryad watched them all. She began to love the swift sadness of streets. How joy passed quickly and was not insulted by that. How grief paused, then moved so others could pass. One evening, during the exhibition's great festival, the dryad felt a tug inside her, a small, impossible hand pulling at the door between worlds. Lanterns had been strung along the boulevard, red and gold. The domed hall blazed like a captured dawn. Music skated over the cobbles. Firework flowers opened in the sky and, like all flowers, fell. The dryad's sap beat time to a human rhythm. Desire, rare in her woodland life, where time caresses rather than kisses, rose like a tide. A silver-winged little thing, call it a city elf, born from the first match ever struck, alighted on the chestnut's lowest bough. "Do you want to walk?" it asked, as if asking, "Do you want to breathe?" The dryad listened to the thousands of feet stitching a night into a memory. "Yes," she said. "Then come," said the match spark elf. "It is the hour when trees may try on the shape of their shadows." The bark opened like curtains, and the dryad stepped out. She was light and leaf and girl. Her hair carried the smell of afternoons. Her dress was the pale green of the first word on a branch. She took one step and felt the stone, another, and felt history, a third, and felt hunger. Human life rushed at her as a city rushes at a provincial heart. She moved through the square. No one knew her, yet everyone's eyes slid kindly across her the way a palm slides across a warm table. A flower seller pressed a daisy crown into her hands. "You look like April," the woman said, not knowing she had spoken a true name. A baker, closing his shop, offered 2 sugared almonds. "For luck," he said. A boy bowed foolishly and breathlessly and ran away before she could return his smile. The dryad wanted to keep the whole evening like a pocket watch. In the great hall she saw wonders. A loom throwing shuttles back and forth like swallows. A velvet so blue it carried night in its weave. A printing press beating out pages beloved by future school children and detested by present ones. A tiny engine that drank a pinch of coal and tugged a train as if teaching iron how to dream. The dryad touched nothing. She had always been giver, not taker, but the world touched her with every glance. Outside, A square of grass no larger than a coat spread itself under a fence. It was the city's excuse for a meadow. On it lay a seamstress in a borrowed dress, her feet bare, her shoes hidden under a newspaper, as if shame were weather. She laughed up at a young soldier whose uniform fit him like a first poem fits a mouth. "Dance," the soldier said, and held out his hand. The dryad had never danced the way people do, feet scribbling, eyes confessed to, but her body had practiced for centuries with the wind. She took his hand, and the music took hers. They were not graceful, which is often a relief to grace. They were happy, which is worse luck for anything that wants to be forgotten. The soldier laughed too loud. The seamstress teased, clapping in time. The crowd made a ring the way human beings make rings for puppies and miracles. The dryad's feet remembered dew. The soldier's boots remembered mud. For a moment the world became as it sometimes does, exactly itself. "Where do you live?" he asked when the music fell laughing over its own feet. She pointed at the chestnut. "In a tree?" He grinned. "Yes," she said simply. "Then I shall walk you home," he declared, and did, because soldiers are trained to pair courage with foolishness. They stood beneath the leaves. The soldier looked up. "It's a fine tree," he said, feeling that praise was owed to something he could not name. He bowed and went. The seamstress, who had followed because curiosity is kin to angels, lingered. "I sew in the mornings," she said shyly, "and sit on that bench in the evenings. If you should ever step out again, you may sit beside me and we will be two girls among so many ladies." "I will," the dryad said, meaning it. Night turned its face. The midnight bell looked at itself in the fountain. The match elf, who had light for bones, fluttered against her arm. "Listen," it said. In the distance, axes spoke, short, workmanlike sentences. The exhibition would soon be over. The great hall would continue, but some of its avenues would be cleared. The chestnut's neighbor, a poplar planted wrong, had been marked for felling. The sound was a rumor of endings. The dryad shivered. "How long?" she asked. "For you," said the elf. "As long as your roots find kindness." Its small voice softened. "But be careful. The city drinks deep. It can drink the water from under a tree without noticing it was a cup." The dryad returned to the bark. She felt the trunk embrace her shape. She felt the roots report their findings. Gravel, water, a pocket of rich soil where some child had once buried a crust of bread for a pretend funeral. She slept, if it can be called sleep when the veins of a leaf keep counting stars. Days fell off the calendar like quiet fruit. The seamstress returned to the bench with stockings to mend and a needle that knew more holes than weddings. The soldier passed sometimes, not always. War drills have their own grammar. The violinist learned a new piece that made rich men remember they had once been poor, and made poor men remember they had once been rich, which is the true work of music. Children climbed the fence. Policemen pretended not to see unless pretending would cause trouble. The chestnut gave light to all who sat under it, which is something trees do that lamps do not. The dryad began to study people with the attention she had once given beetles and rain. She learned that longing is a second spine. It helps some stand upright and makes others crooked. She learned that laughter is heavier when it follows hunger and lighter when it leads it. She learned that some who walked alone were less alone than couples whose arms did not match at the elbows. One afternoon, men in uniforms of authority arrived with shovels in a cart. They did not look up at the leaves. They looked down at the paving where the roots bulged. The dryad felt iron probe around her ankles. "It strangles the pipes," one man said. "We will loosen it. There's a new water main." Another man ran his finger along a plan. "Cut here," he said, and tapped the artery of her life. The first bite of the shovel was a small scream. The tree did not move. Trees rarely do. The dryad felt a dizziness, like standing quickly after centuries of sitting. She remembered the hill and the patient sheep. She remembered a child who had once pledged herself to the chestnut because it had kept her picnic from burning. She looked for the match elf, but it was day and the elf was somewhere teaching a child to strike a flame without fear. The seamstress leaped up from her bench. "Sir," she cried to the nearest man, "it shades my midday." "And buckles the tiles," he replied not unkindly. "We will free it a little." "Free," the seamstress repeated, and then did the opposite of repeating. She understood. The soldier came as if summoned by her fear. So did the violinist. So did two old men who played chess on the bench most afternoons. So did a girl with a hoop. So did a woman pushing twins. So did a baker with flour on his cuff. So did the flower seller with her tray of Aprils. They stood around the men and their shovels, and an odd quiet came over them. The quiet armies have just before they decide to be armies. The seamstress spoke. "This tree is our ceiling," she said. "Please be gentle with our sky." The men hesitated, which is a better miracle than angels most days. They cut less. They padded the roots with loam. They set a small fence and promised to return with more water. They left, and the crowd dissolved into their separate lives the way rain dissolves into useful invisibility. The dryad rested. The city's kindness had been a cup. Yet the wound was real. She felt the edges of it, and knew that edges have a way of widening if nobody watches them. She told herself she would step out that night, sit with the seamstress and gather threads of comfort as women have always done, praying with their hands. Evening came, and with it, the blush of many lamps. The dryad reached for the bark's latch and felt a weakness at the wrist of her being. She tried again. The door would not open. The cut on the roots had taught the trunk to cling to its heart. The chestnut was afraid. "Not tonight," it told her, as bodies tell us when fever has requested privacy. She stayed within. She dreamed the soldier picked up a fallen conker, brown and shining, and put it in his pocket as a promise. She dreamed the seamstress threaded a needle with a hair from her own head because the thread had knotted too often. She dreamed the match elf slept inside a spent spark, smiling with the weariness of small heroes. She woke to a rain that was patient, and to a morning that was not. Workmen returned with a cart and a saw. There are days when cities cannot wait. An inspector had decided the chestnut tilted dangerously. A letter had been signed. A stamp had been stomped. The men did not come to free. They came to end. A policeman stood nearby to keep order that had not yet considered being disorderly. The seamstress could not come. She was at the factory whose siren speaks a harder language than birds. The soldier was gone to maneuvers. The violinist played. Sometimes that is what a man can do when he cannot stop anything else. The first cut is the longest. It enters the wood. The wood learns that iron can write. The dryad felt the alphabet of ending travel up the trunk into her ribs. She did not cry out. Trees do not cry out. She did something more difficult. She forgave. She forgave the city for needing pipes. She forgave the inspector for having a letter to answer. She forgave the men for being tired. She forgave herself for wanting what she had wanted. The saw bit. The trunk groaned. The leaves made applause that had forgotten the performance's name. As the tree began to lean, a child darted under the barrier, a girl with a hoop and knees too brave. The crowd gasped. A branch sagged above her like a sentence preparing to become a verdict. Now the door opened. Pain makes doors. The dryad stepped out in a single, clean gesture and caught the falling branch in a way no hand could. It was not that she held wood. She held its hesitation. The men shouted. The baker leapt the fence like a younger man. He gathered the child. He stumbled clear. The branch fell and struck the pavement instead of the small kingdom of her ribs. The crowd's relief rose like a flock. No one saw the dryad except the violinist, whose profession requires seeing what notes cannot say. She looked at him, and he did not ask her to stay. He lifted the bow and played a thanks that was also a goodbye. The rest happened quickly. It must when a story reaches its honest necessity. The chestnut let go of the sky. The sky, being generous, forgave it for letting go. The trunk broke. The crown lay on the boulevard like a royal cloak set down for the last time. Men set to work sawing usefulness from beauty. Children collected leaves, and mothers said yes. Just this once, because grief makes lenient magistrates. The dryad stood in the sawdust, which is a tree's glitter, and breathed in the smell of her years. She felt herself becoming lighter. To be a dryad is to be the bridge between wood and wind. When the wood is gone, there is only wind. She took one step toward the bench where the seamstress would sit that evening and another toward the soldier's pocket, where the conker was making a round promise, and a third toward the violin's note that climbed above all necessary noise. Then she stopped. "I have no feet," she said, not sadly. "I am already walking." The match elf fluttered near, his little wings smoking with sympathy. "Do you regret the night?" he asked. She thought of lanterns, sugared almonds, the seamstress's bare feet in borrowed grass, the soldier's laughter, the city's breath. "No," she said, "I regret only what I forgot to water." The elf bowed, which is how small flames honor great ones, and went to teach some new child how to ask fire for light without getting burned. All that day and into the next, people came to the open space where a tree had been and told each other their memories. The chestnut became larger in its absence, as the best things do. The city planted a sapling soon after. Not a chestnut, those roots are troublesome, but a plane tree with a mottled trunk like a soldier's coat and a will to live in smoke. The seamstress watered it from a tin pail. The violinist played it a lullaby. The baker leaned on his broom and said to the policeman, "It is not the same." The policeman, who had escorted funerals and parades with equal care, answered, "It will be something." It was. In time, the plane tree learned the square's weather. Birds learned its address. Children grew to be the kind of adults who point and say, "When I was small." The soldier returned with a limp that matched his smile, married the seamstress, and sat with her under the mottled shade while their baby slept in a pram pink as a shell. The violinist moved away when life moved him. The baker grew tired and generous. The policeman retired into a garden with peas and fewer letters. The city forgot and remembered as cities do. And the dryad? If you looked up on certain evenings, when the lamps were first lit and the domed hall held dusk like a gentle argument, you could see a green thought drifting above the square, a shape like a young woman and a flame. She had no tree now, but trees had her. She lived in leaves wherever leaves were willing, and sometimes in the long hair of girls who ran, and sometimes in the uniforms of boys who learned to bow properly to shade, and sometimes, often, in the small civic mercy of people who put water on the roots of something that could not ask. If a moral must be plucked, like a ripe conker from the shell of this tale, let it be smooth and heavy in the pocket. Moral. Longing may draw us out of what keeps us alive, but love draws us back to water the roots. Hold fast to what gives shade. Step out when kindness calls. And remember, cities live because someone, unseen, chooses daily to be a tree, the elder tree mother. It began with a cough that would not be argued with. In a city of narrow courtyards and tall windows arranged like book spines, a small boy lay in bed and listened to pipes mutter behind the walls, and to his own chest argue with air. It was the kind of cough that sits down in the middle of a child and declares, "Here I shall live for a while." The boy's name was Jonas, though his mother often called him my heartbeat when he was asleep, as if he needed reminding. The doctor had said sensible things, he always did. "Warm the room," he prescribed, "but not too warm. Keep him quiet. Elderflower tea, hot, and a dream if you can find one." Dreams are not sold at chemists, but mothers know where they keep themselves. Jonas's mother lit the stove, spread new sheets that smelled of sun, and said, "I will fetch the flowers." In the courtyard stood an elder tree, as old as the house in Kinder. All year it had watched people come and go by the gate like thoughts leaving and returning. In spring it dressed itself in milk-white umbels, each a small moon surrounded by pollen stars. In summer the air around it smelled like a story about to be told. In autumn it offered berries like beads to birds that needed necklaces. In winter it kept the snow on its shoulders as a shawl. Today it wore spring. The mother took her basket and climbed the iron stair to the gallery that looked into the branches. She chose a cluster of flowers with the care one gives to choosing words, thanked the tree, for she was that sort of person, and went inside. She brewed the tea the old way, flowers in the pot, kettle sighing, steam rising with the sound of promises. The room turned into June. The cough blinked, surprised. She set the cup on the table by the bed. "Drink," she said, and kissed Jonas's hair, which had learned the habit of sticking up when Hope did. He sipped. The heat carried sweetness. The sweetness carried fields. He closed his eyes and found himself at the edge of a meadow where everything was exactly itself. Bees with golden missions, grass leaned over by wind, blue too bright to be polite. And there, seated on the curved root at the elder's foot, was an old woman in a dress the color of leaves after rain. Her hair was white blossom, her hands were bark and blessing. She smelled like honey and books. In her lap lay a teapot with little white flowers painted on its belly, and a handle worn by the fingers of Story. "Good afternoon," she said, as if they had been expecting each other. "Are you the tree?" Jonas asked, though his question knew the answer. "I am the elder of the elder," she smiled. "Some call me Hildamore, some Elder Tree Mother. I answer to kindness." She tilted her head, and the blossoms above them trembled as if laughing. "You have a cough. It wants attention. We will give it a tail instead." Jonas looked at her teapot. "Will you pour the story?" He felt shy asking, as if one should not say such things aloud in daylight. "That is the only way to serve it properly," said she, and filled 2 cups with steam that carried shapes in it. Ships, houses, faces that arrived and faded like memory practicing to be truth. "Drink and listen. The more you listen, the less you cough." And so he listened. "Once," began Elder Tree Mother, "where this courtyard stands, there was only a field with a path through it and a girl who walked that path with a pail. She wore wooden shoes that talked to the rocks. She would stop at the ditch because the elder grew there even then, and she would cut blossoms for her mother's kitchen. She married a cooper who made barrels round as moons. He said the scent of elder meant there would be wine enough in autumn to make the winter honest. They had a son who learned his letters on the bark, a slanting like a branch in wind, B round as berries, C curved as a handle. He grew the way sons grow in old stories without asking permission of anyone. Years later, the cooper died, as men do who have taught wood its circles and are ready to be a circle themselves. The son built this house. He said the elder must stay in the courtyard, for it was the oldest neighbor, and the oldest neighbor knows the quietest news. He brought his bride under the tree and promised to listen. They kept their promise, at least often enough that love did not take offense. The blossoms stirred, and Jonas's cough forgot what word it had been about to speak. "But this is not only a house's story," she went on. "It is yours. Look." She leaned her teapot so the steam spread like a curtain being drawn aside. In it, Jonas saw himself smaller, so small he fit into a patch of sunlight with room to spare, cradled under the elder while his mother read to him from a book that had lost its cover but kept its courage. He saw her mouth shape castles and cats, storms that knew when to stop, kings who learned they were fathers, and fathers who learned they were children. He remembered. He had put his head against her arm and believed completely the sentence she had not spoken, but had meant with her bones. "You will not be alone." "Stories go down like roots," the elder tree mother said softly. "They hold even when the wind thinks it is clever." Jonas touched the cup. It had cooled slightly, but the smell rose up as if to meet his fingers halfway. "Will I always be sick?" he asked, which is not what he wanted to ask. What he wanted to ask was, "Will I be small forever? Will the mean boy from the next stair always laugh like a broken spoon? Will the dark think I am delicious?" "No," said she, answering all of it. "You will be many things. You will run in a corridor so fast your feet forget the floor. You will steal cherries and feel terrible and bring them back. You will write your name on a fogged window and then someone else's, and then be surprised at the rightness of seeing them together. You will sit in a room far from here and smell elder and know where you are. You will lose something important and find it again, made different by the losing. You will cough again maybe when you are old, but by then you will know the address of tea. She set down her cup and patted the air as if smoothing a sheet. Would you like a story about the sea or about a stove? Stove, he chose, because the sea was too big for his chest just now. Very well. She tapped the teapot's lid, and a little figure stepped out, ridiculous and dignified at once. A brass stove, with a door for a mouth, legs like stiff boots, and a pipe that looked like a tall hat. This is Herr Stove from the flat below. He thinks himself a general because he commands heat. Herr Stove clicked his door with importance. At your service, he creaked. I have boiled soups and braided breath on windows. I have kept confessions warm while they decided whether to become speeches. He bowed toward the elder tree mother. I attend upon Madame in winter, he added, as if she were a queen. Perhaps she was. The stove told how in deepest January a baby had arrived in the downstairs room at 2 a.m, when all wise cats are asleep and only very foolish mice dance. The midwife's hands were firm as pliers and kind as loaves. The father had walked holes in the rug, making a map of worry. Herr Stove had burned as if the world were depending upon it, which it was. The elder called across the courtyard, he said, and the baby answered. That is how addresses are exchanged. Even now when the child naps, I hear the small breath and think, good, good again. Jonas laughed in his blanket, which made the cough huff, and then sit down to listen like everybody else. Another? Asked Elder Tree Mother. Another, he nodded. Then the sea, she said, because opposites are medicine. Again the steam lifted its theater curtain. This time he saw a man carrying a bundle on his back, walking down the street with shoes that had learned the shape of long roads. The bundle moved. It was a violin in a case tied with rope. The man stopped in the courtyard, set down the case, and leaned his head against the elder trunk the way tired thoughts lean against something taller than themselves. He wept, this man, quietly and thoroughly. The tree did not mind. Trees drink all sorts of weather. He was leaving, said Elder Tree Mother. He had played in taverns where men consider themselves more interesting than music. He had played for rooms where there was never enough money for both eating and listening lost. He was going to the sea to ship out as a cook's helper, because sea salt pays better than applause. He cried because his hands wanted strings and not knives. I shook blossom into his hair, as much blessing as I could spare. He went. His ship sang. He did not drown. He fed men who cursed, and then said thank you with their plates. Years later he returned with a pocket watch and a scar and a song he wrote for the elder tree which nobody heard but everyone did. He played it under these windows. Your mother stood there with you in her arms and thought, this is a good place to live. Jonas felt his throat loosen. He breathed in, and the breath went farther than the last one had. Where are all the stories kept? He asked. In the sap, she said, as simply as naming the color of sky. In the rings. In the small rooms of cells where sugar turns into patience. In the cracks where old wind has left its whisper. And in you. Once you've heard them, you will carry them without knowing, the way a shirt carries sun if it is hung on a line. He looked at her hands. He had not noticed before. Around her wrists she wore bracelets of tiny elderberries, dark and shining. On one finger, a ring that looked very much like a wreath made by children who don't mean perfection, and so attain it. At her throat, a string of dried blossoms, their whiteness turned to ivory like old piano keys. What happens, he asked, when winter comes and the elder has no flowers? Elder Tree Mother lifted a brow, and the bark above them creaked with amusement. Do you suppose I vanish with my frock? I have other clothes. In winter I wear silence and show you shapes you forget in summer. I rattle stories then. I speak bone to bone. And when snow arrives, I change into lace and remind you that even cold can be pretty if you are inside looking out. Besides, winter is when tea is most quickly believed. Jonas's eyes grew heavy, and the way that means healing has begun its work. The cough sulked but could not assemble itself into a speech. The old woman took his cup and refilled it. She added a slice of lemon that wasn't there, and a spoonful of honey from a hive on a farm he had not yet visited, the bees of which knew the elder by her first name. "Before you sleep," she said, "I will tell you a small truth." She leaned close. He smelled rain in her breath. People think they plant trees. Sometimes they do. Mostly trees plant people. We set them down and tell them, "Stay a while." We hold their windows in our hands. We take the laundry of their worries and flap it in the wind until it dries. We count their children taller each spring. We forgive their axes in exchange for their ladders. We whisper the same thing every morning. "Grow where you are, little one. The light is here too." The Elf of the Rose. In a garden surrounded by old stone walls and whispered secrets, there stood a rose bush unlike any other. Its blossoms were not many, but each one opened as if the sun itself had stopped to listen. The petals were the color of a sunset seen through tears. Soft pink, a hint of gold, and the faintest memory of white. People walked past the garden every day and said, "Ah, what a rose!" But no one truly saw what lived within it, because in the heart of the largest blossom, where the perfume was sweetest and the light thinnest, there dwelt an elf no bigger than a grain of sand. He was born from the first breath of the morning dew, and though his body was delicate as mist, his heart was as strong as spring. His hair shimmered like spider silk caught in dawn. His wings were thin as sighs, and when he moved, they made the air around him hum with a sound smaller than music, but bigger than silence. The Elf of the Rose loved his flower more than himself. When the sun rose, he would climb to the top of the highest petal to greet it. When the wind came whispering through the garden, he would anchor himself deep in the folds so that no breeze could carry him away. He slept inside the bloom every night, wrapped in its soft red curtains, while the scent of the rose filled his dreams with stories of the world beyond the wall, of bees that danced in gold, of swans that sang only once, of children who blew dandelion wishes that turned into stars. One evening, as twilight came walking gently through the garden, the rose slowly closed her petals, folding the elf within her warm embrace. "Good night," she murmured in the language only flowers and elves know. "Good night, my heart," whispered the elf. "Sleep softly." The moon rose, round and watchful, and silvered the garden in calm. The roses slept, the grass held its breath, and the air itself seemed to dream. But not far beyond the wall there came the sound of laughter, the careless laughter of men. The gate creaked open, and 3 young lords, merry from wine, stumbled into the garden. "Roses," cried one. "Let's pluck a bloom for each of our sweethearts." "Only the finest," said another. "And look, there, that one glows even in moonlight." The first stepped forward, his ring flashing coldly. He reached out his gloved hand and tore the very rose in which the elf slept. The stem broke with a cry the men did not hear, and the petals trembled like frightened hearts. The elf awoke with a start. The world was spinning. He clung to the petal as the rose was lifted high, laughing voices booming like thunder around him. Then he was carried through the gate and into a grand house filled with lamps and laughter. The young lord laid the rose upon a polished table, beside a glass of red wine and a letter half written to someone who would never deserve it. "She will love this," he said carelessly. "A rose from my garden at midnight." He did not notice that one small drop of dew still trembled within the petals, a drop that hid a living soul. Hours passed. The laughter faded. The candles grew weary and began to gutter. At last the lord rose from his chair and threw himself upon the bed. The rose lay alone in the lamplight, her stem already drooping, her petals losing the memory of warmth. The elf stepped out from the heart of the flower and looked around the strange room, full of mirrors that pretended to be windows and windows that pretended to be stars. He saw a portrait upon the wall, a beautiful girl, her eyes filled with longing. "For her," whispered the elf, understanding. "He plucked my rose for her." He climbed to the top of the rose's highest petal and looked toward the window where the moon still waited. "My dear flower," he said softly, "you will wither here among these cold things. But I will not leave you alone." He flew to the inkwell upon the table and dipped his tiny hand into the blackness. Then he flew to the letter the young lord had been writing. Carefully, stroke by stroke, he drew upon the paper a shape the man would never notice. A thorn, sharp, hidden, perfect. "Let your words remember what you took," he whispered. Then he returned to the rose. Her petals had begun to fall, one by one, each with the slow grace of forgiveness. The elf gathered them gently and laid them upon the pillow beside the sleeping man. "She gave you beauty," he said, "and you took her without thought. Let her fragrance haunt your dreams." He touched the man's forehead lightly, and for a moment the lord stirred, murmuring something in his sleep. Perhaps a name he did not deserve to say. The elf waited until dawn came stealing in with her pale feet. Then he flew to the window, opened the smallest crack, and carried with him the last petal of his rose. He flew until the city fell away beneath him and fields rolled out like a sigh. At last he came to a hedge of wild roses growing untended beside a brook. There he laid the petal down and pressed a kiss upon it. "Sleep here," he said. "The earth will remember you." The petal sank into the grass, and from that place, when spring came again, a new bush rose, full of flowers that smelled not of perfume, but of memory. The elf made his home among those wild blooms, but he never forgot the garden or the gentle rose who had been his heart. Sometimes, at twilight, he would fly high enough to see the city's lights, and in one window, a woman's face, lonely and still. Perhaps she had received the withered rose and wondered who had plucked it. Years passed as softly as petals fall. The elf grew older, not in body, for elves are dew and light, but in heart. He had learned that beauty lives only where kindness does, and that love taken without thought fades faster than a flower in a glass. One summer evening, as the sun bent low and the brook told stories to the stones, the elf sat upon his favorite blossom. The air was full of bees and golden dust, and he felt his heart become light as wind. "I have lived long enough to know," he said aloud, "that every petal returns to earth, and every heart to love." The rose he sat upon quivered softly. "Then rest," she whispered, "for love never dies, it only changes shape." The elf smiled, and the smile was the last thing the rose saw before he dissolved into her fragrance, becoming part of her forever. When people walked by that hedge in later years, they would pause and say, "These roses smell unlike any others. There's something sad and sweet in them." They did not know that they were breathing a story. Moral: beauty without love fades swiftly, but love, even when lost, turns every wound into bloom. To take a flower is easy. To cherish it is divine. The false collar. In a chest of linens that smelled faintly of lemon and iron, there once lay a collar that was not at all what it claimed to be. It looked at first glance like the fine starched collars gentlemen wore to dinners where talk clipped along like scissors. It was high and white, with points sharp enough to stab a compliment. But it was false. A pasteboard trick covered with a thin skin of linen, made to look noble without needing to live nobly. If truth had been a needle in that drawer, it would have pricked the thing on sight. The false collar believed more in appearance than in washing. "What is a life?" it told the cuffs beside it. "If not a display cabinet, one must be seen." The cuffs, who had known elbows and ink and had been scrubbed by hands that did not apologize, only shrugged. They had learned that talking back to vanity is like ironing a cloud. A young clerk owned the chest. Each morning he dressed himself with speed. He had clocks to flatter and ledgers to obey, and on the day this begins, his true collars lay in a bowl of blue water awaiting the thump and whistle of the iron. "A borrowed polish will do," he muttered, late already, and tied on the false collar with a bit of thread. Just for today. Just for today. Echoed the false collar in the private room where lies rehearse. Outside, the city rang with wheels and shoes. The clerk strode through streets that smelled of pastry and old stone. The collar rose above his cravat like a swan that had learned to pose. Through shop windows it admired itself. In puddles it approved its own reflection and scolded the water for wavering. "See," it whispered. "What a line. What a whiteness." It forgot to thank the morning light for lending its glory and the thread for holding its throat. At noon, the clerk delivered papers to a house with a brass knocker shaped like a lion who had fallen in love with himself. The maid who opened the door had dark eyes and a mouth that believed in laughter. She noticed, as maids do. Everything a person hopes will be noticed, and everything he hopes will not. Her glance fell on the collar. It glittered with a glitter that did not reach its roots. "Mind your chin," she said kindly. "A wind will shame that necktie." "It is a collar," said the false collar haughtily, though his wearer could not hear him. "And I am shamed by nothing." Inside, however, he straightened his pasteboard bones. Kindness unsettles counterfeits more than scorn does. That evening the clerk attended a gathering above a haberdasher's, where poets practiced their vowels and merchants practiced their listening. Candles shone in pewter sticks. A violin tried not to be drowned by opinions. The false collar stood at attention around the clerk's throat and decided he was the star of the evening. "Behold," he thought, "how I brighten the man. Without me he would be a sentence without a capital letter." A real linen collar stood nearby on another gentleman's neck, modest, clean, not too stiff to bow. When the violinist ended his piece, the assembly clapped. The modest collar rustled politely. Our hero, for he made himself so, shone so hard he wearied his own whiteness. He longed to be praised out loud, not merely admired. Vanity, like thirst, grows with drinking. He found his chance by the punch bowl. A woman in dove-gray silk stood there, watching the door the way people watch when they have promised themselves not to watch the door. Her gloves were mended so perfectly that only love could have done the work. The false collar preened. The clerk bowed and offered her a glass. She took it. Her eyes flicked to the collar, a quick, precise glance trained by years of looking at cloth in poor light. "Sir," she said to the clerk, with a smile that meant no harm, "your collar's courage is admirable. It stands as if it has not yet learned of laundry." She moved away to greet someone else. The clerk colored, fiddled with his tie, laughed too loudly. The false collar burned with outrage. "Laundry!" he spat inwardly. As if soaking in soap could improve perfection. Water ruins polish. Scrubbing erases elegance. The thing is to look clean, not to be so. Surely everyone knows that. The evening ran on. Speech grew fat. Candles sighed. At last the clerk returned to his room, undid his cravat, and tugged at the collar's thread. It gave. He tossed the collar unthinkingly onto the washstand. There stood the honest basin, white chipped, full of the day's gray truth. The soap blinked its blind, humble eye. The brush leaned in its corner like a soldier dismissed but ready. The false collar, catching sight of this assembly, felt insulted down to the paste. "I will not be treated," he declared to the dark, "as if I were anything so vulgar as cloth." Morning entered, tractable and pale. The clerk, late again, dressed in haste, fresh shirt, true cuffs, a real collar ironed into a decent softness. The false collar was overlooked. No, not overlooked, avoided without any intention, which hurts worse. He lay on the washstand, stiff with indignation. Dust settled on him with the democratic patience of dust. By noon the maid came in with a pail and a cloth, humming a song that had never been printed but lived happily anyway. She lifted the collar between finger and thumb. "Ah," she said, "one of those." She had seen pasteboard finery before, a trick to spare washing, a pretense to save pressing. She opened the window. The winter light was honest. She snapped the collar once and listened. It made a small sound like a boast breaking. "Into the rag sack with you," she decided, and turned to find it. "Madam," the false collar cried in a thread-thin voice no one heard. "Do you know who I am? I have attended salons. I have framed opinions. Poets have gestured at me while praising the moon." "Rag sack," she repeated, practical as gravity. Fear sharpened him. In terror he leapt, or felt that he leapt, from her hand and slid behind the washstand, where sink water and lost buttons hold parliament. There he hid among a tangle of hairpins, a bent comb, a coin that had given up hope, and the small blue bead of a rosary broken during a hasty prayer. The false collar made himself very quiet. Pride does not like being found on the floor. Days passed. The maid swept. The clerk came and went. The world kept its appointments. The collar sulked in dust. "I am refined," he told the hairpins. "I cannot be expected to endure treatment intended for objects of utility." The hairpins, who had spined 1,000 careless buns, only glinted. The comb, missing 3 teeth and proud of the ones that remained, said nothing. The coin dreamed of pockets that remembered it. The little blue bead did not dream. It prayed. Then, on a rain-bowled afternoon when the city's chimneys smoked like tired thoughts, a hand not the maid's reached behind the stand and rummaged. It belonged to a tailor's apprentice who rented the back corner of the room to sleep in and to practice stitches that would someday be admired without being noticed. His fingers found the collar. He drew it out and laughed, softly, not cruelly. "Well then," he said, "false finery, but even lies may bind a straight seam." The apprentice took up needle and strong thread. He cut the collar into narrow strips, soaked them, softened them, pressed them flat between 2 boards, then used the pasteboard to strengthen the waist of a pair of trousers that sagged for lack of company. He sewed. The needle whispered yes through the cloth. The thread agreed. The false collar, dismayed, discovered that being useful hurt less than being proud. The trousers belonged to the clerk, whose waist had lived on hope and coffee for too long. He slipped them on, and they stood where they should. He looked better for it. Honest better, not reflected window better. He did not know why he felt more himself. He went to work and did not think of his collar once. When the apprentice finished, he had a tiny piece of pasteboard left, no longer a collar except in memory. He set it on the windowsill to dry. Evening drew a gentle line across the glass. Outside, in the court, the wind rehearsed an old song and forgot its ending. The piece of pasteboard remembered the room of candles, the dove-gray silk, the word laundry spoken kindly and therefore sharply, the maid's glance that had seen through him as if he were water. He would have wept if varnish could weep. A spider came down on a thread, as confident as a rope walker, and measured the pasteboard with 8-legged arithmetic. He fastened a line to the corner, slung a second line across the sill, tried a third from the latch. "A web," he announced to the air. "Architecture." "Architecture," echoed the false collar, astonished into humility. "Work that holds," said the spider. "Work that catches. Work that must be mended daily. What are you?" "I was display," the pasteboard confessed. "I thought that was the same thing." The spider laughed without meanness. "You shine or you hold," he said. "Rarely both." He set to weaving, his feet plucking the silk into triangles that trusted one another. The pasteboard watched as dusk stitched itself to night. Soon the collar, no, the remnant, felt a new weight upon it. A candle stub placed for a moment by the maid while she straightened the room. Warmth seeped through. Wax, white and docile, pooled along the edge and cooled into a small crescent, neat as a thumbnail. The pasteboard smelled smoke and remembered salons and promises. It felt wax and learned steadiness. The apprentice noticed the little crescent in the morning. He smiled, trimmed it with a penknife, and on a whim, fixed a scrap of paper to it, an address tag for a parcel bound for a mother's hands. "Hold fast," he said aloud, teasing his own craft. The pasteboard held fast. It rode the parcel through rain and wagon rattle to a kitchen where the tag was read. set aside in a drawer with string, and later used to label a jar of plum jam that fed a child through winter evenings. It was nothing, only a bit of card with neat ink. But when the mother reached for sweetness, her fingers touched the label and remembered a son who sewed himself into usefulness far from home. Thus the false collar lived on, divested of falsehood by service. He did not attend parties again. He did not frame opinions or dazzle puddles. He stiffened a waistband, steadied a label, and, on a different day when the jar was empty, became tinder for a stove that warmed a pair of tired feet. He felt the match, the small brave bite of flame, the sudden truth of heat. Ah, he thought, melting without regret. So this is what it is to belong to the living. As for those who had met him earlier, the story did its work on them too. The clerk, without knowing why, began to choose true collars more often, even if it meant rising earlier to wash and iron. He discovered that soap and punctuality improve a man's face more than pasteboard ever could. The maid, who had a gift for seeing, found crewels and linens to mend in the evenings for a little money, and one day the haberdasher himself asked if she would oversee his window, because she placed things so that they told the truth about themselves and still looked beautiful. The woman in dove-gray silk married not a gentleman with a bright collar, but a schoolmaster with an ink-stained cravat. They were not elegant, but their table always had room for another plate. The spider kept building. One morning his web caught a golden highlight that made the whole sill look blessed, and the apprentice, passing, touched the strand with a finger and smiled as if he had been knighted. Years later, a boy stood in that kitchen with the stove and the plum jam, reading labels to practice his letters. He pointed to a new jar, labeled in the same careful hand, and spelled it out, CLOVE. His mother kissed the crown of his head and said, "We write what is in the jar, little one. We must always write what is in the jar. If we must, as our old friend Hans liked to do, hang a small moral on the end like a bell that knows when to ring, let it be this. Moral: a shine that will not wash is only paste. Better a plain honesty that endures soap, heat, and use, than a false brightness that fears the basin. Names should fit contents, collars should fit work, and lives, like labels, must tell the truth about what they hold." The flax. In a meadow at the edge of a village where roofs made tidy steps toward the church spire, a patch of flax awoke with spring. It lifted its slender stalks like 100 quiet questions, and unfolded blue flowers the color of morning remembered in a teacup. The breeze came early each day to count them. The bees came later to gossip, and when evening strolled home across the fields, the flax kept a little light in its petals, as if reluctant to extinguish the sky. "Look at me," said the flax, not loudly, for flax is modest by nature. "How fine and straight I grow. My stems are threads waiting to become a story. My blooms are small heavens. Surely the world will be kind to such a creature." The lark answered with a ribbon of song. "The world is kind," he trilled, "and also busy. Keep your courage." Then he stitched the sky to the earth with music and left the flax to consider. Rain knelt over the field and taught everything to drink. Sun patted the flax's shoulder and taught it to stand. Children ran past with slices of bread and laughter. A girl with a red ribbon stopped to touch a blue flower with one careful finger, as if learning the exact weight of gentleness. The flax trembled with happiness at so small a blessing. Days moved forward like a row of chairs. The flax reached its height, and the wind combed it until it shone. "What now?" the flax asked the meadow. "I feel full of waiting." Now came the men with sickles. The sound was not cruel, merely definite. The field bowed once, twice, then lay down in tidy swaths as if to sleep after a long uprightness. The flax felt the blade at the ankles of its life, and because it had listened to birds, did not call it enemy. This is the next thing, it told itself, and believed it as far as belief could carry. Bound in bundles with its fellows, the flax rode on a wagon to a place where water spoke a darker language. There it was set into a redding pond, cool, brown, and patient. The water slid between the stalks, loosening what needed to loosen. "You will be rid of what cannot be woven," murmured the pond, which had done this work for centuries. It smelled of mud and old stories, and although the flax shivered, it did not complain. Something in the depth felt like truth, a soft, persistent undoing that was not destruction but preparation. "Will I drown?" the flax asked the water. "You will change," the water answered, which is not the same and not so different. When the flax came out, autumn had scratched its initials on the hedges. The bundles steamed on the bank in the low sun. The field people spread them, turned them, listened for a dry whisper that meant now. Then came breaking, wooden mallets kissing the stalks to persuade the woody heart to let go. Then scutching where strong hands scraped and hackling, where combs of iron drew the fibers into shine. It was not gentle work, but the hands were sure and the intention kind. "How narrow I have become," thought the flax, seeing itself in long pale hair on the hackler's bench. "How pure," the combs sang, each tooth a patient teacher. "The rough stayed behind, the fine goes forward." The spinner took the flax and gave it a new music. Her foot tapped the treadle, the wheel purred. Her fingers spoke the language of twist and draw. The flax felt itself lengthen beyond its imagining, one fiber finding another, and another, until thin strength sang between the spinner's hand and the whirl. "Thread," the spinner murmured approvingly. "You will keep promises in stitches." She wound the newborn line upon a bobbin, an infant moon collecting light. "Is this life better or worse?" the flax asked the turning wheel. "Both and neither," purred the wheel. "It is deeper." Warp and weft waited on the loom, a wooden gate between before and after. The warp stretched in even ranks like a field drilled for soldiers. The weft, carried in a shuttle like a small swift bird, flew in and out, in and out. The beater, stern as a schoolmaster and just as loving, pressed each pass into order. The flax became cloth, first sparse as polite conversation, then dense as winter bread. Pattern rose like a village from a map. The spinner hummed. The loom answered in clacks and sighs. When at last the web slipped from the beam, the flax scarcely recognized itself. "I am wide," it marveled, "and I am useful." "You are linen," said the weaver, laying the cloth across her arms with the tenderness kept for infants and harvest. "You will touch skin and keep it honest." Bleaching followed. The lawn spread on grass where sun and dew took turns whitewashing it, then smoothing by a hot iron that breathed out the day's labor as a little cloud. The linen cooled to a fine quiet. It became shirts for a wedding chest, napkins, hem-stitched by a girl whose needle learned patience on the edge of a sigh, and sheets for a bed that would know everything people know and keep the secret. The wedding came. The bride wore lawn that remembered blue flowers without saying so. The groom's cuffs were the color of promises. They lay that first night between linen that had been rain and listening. The flax felt their hearts race and slow and learned the weight of vows by the way they warmed and cooled the cloth. "I hold," it thought, fulfilled. Years passed like well-folded seasons. The linen wore and was washed and wore again. Soap learned its creases. Sun memorized its damp handwriting on the line. It grew thin in the places love touches, at the shoulders and along the edge where a hand reaches out in the dark. When a tear appeared the size of a small regret, the wife mended it with a thread pulled from the hem. "There," she said, "we go on." At last the sheets were too honest to pretend. They were cut down to shirts for the children and smocks for work. The fabric, relieved of ceremony, rejoiced in play. It ran with bare legs through orchards, wore grass stains like medals, wiped honey from small faces, carried the comforting smell of bread home from the bakehouse. It learned the weather of ordinary afternoons, which is the most important weather. "I have descended," the flax thought once, briefly, remembering the proud table and smooth bed. "You have arrived," said the day, and set another bowl to cool on the sill. Cloth, like lives, thins toward the truth. One winter, when frost wrote its silver script on the panes, the linen, now a shirt, gave up at the elbows. There was no more of it left to turn. The cuff had forgotten how to be a circle. The mother held the garment in her lap under the lamp, turned it this way and that, and smiled. "Rags," she declared, but her voice made the word into a blessing. "Rags are not finished." They began their second career with a bucket and soap. They learned to make shine where fatigue had tried to live. On a window glass that needed courage to let in more day. On a spoon that must reflect a child's face fully. On a scrubbed board that would never be mistaken for marble and would never wish to be. The linen liked this work. No audience, only results. It came home gray and wrung out and never once felt ashamed. When even that usefulness thinned to the transparency of memory, the mother tore the rag into squares and put them in a basket near the cradle. The baby had a cough and a nose like a small berry. The linen became handkerchiefs, soft, absorbent, intimate. It learned the taste of salt tears and the little trumpet of a child learning to be brave. "I hold again," thought the flax, and the thought was as bright as the first morning in the meadow. A painter knocked at the door in spring with the shyness of those who carry colors for a living. He asked for old linen to make rags. The mother, who traded fairly, gave him a bundle tied with string, and he, grateful, left a sketch of the baby sleeping. A few lines, a shadow smudged with a loving thumb. The linen entered a new kingdom. It traveled in the painter's pocket to fields where poppies rehearsed being outrageous, and to the quay where ships practiced leaving. It wiped blue from a brush and learned sky that way. It tamed a green that had been too proud for grass. It softened a black until it admitted the existence of depth. "Will I become a painting?" The linen asked a rag, already stained with sunsets. "You will make one possible," the rag replied, "which is a nobler fate." Years again. The rag box emptied and filled like a tide. Some pieces went into the paper vat at the mill by the stream, where hammers beat a slurry into smooth forgetfulness. The flax, now more memory than fiber, dissolved with its fellows and recohered, flattened, pressed, dried. Paper, fine and strong, with a deckled edge that looked like the shore of a map. A clerk bought the stack with a sense of occasion. He had a pen he loved and a letter to write to a woman who had a way of making windows brighter, simply by standing near them. He sat at a table, chose a sheet, and began. Ink flowed, words obeyed. The paper held them as if language were a fragile creature that needed a bed. "My dear," wrote the man, because bravery sometimes borrows old formulas, "I have not much to offer beyond a consistent heart and a clean ledger, but if either is of value, you shall have them." The paper kept the pledge intact across miles and weather. It reached the woman's hands, and the linen felt again the quickening of human pulses it had once steadied in a bed. A yes came back, the kind of yes that makes walls warmer. The letter was kept in a box with buttons that had lost their posts, and a curl snipped on a day with cake. More paper became a schoolchild's copybook. Flax, which had once been a field of questions, now held answers with loops that leaned too boldly and crossed with courage. "The river runs to the sea," wrote the child, tongue between teeth. "Good," said the paper, approving the truth and not minding the blots. It was torn out, praised, tacked to a wall, and the tack left a proud hole. On a Sabbath in December, sheet music was copied onto the finest of the flax-made pages. At evensong, the choir lifted the notes from the paper, gave them lungs, and sent them wandering among rafters where spiders kept modest cathedrals of their own. The linen shivered with the memory of the wheel's hum and the loom's beat. This new rhythm belonged to breath and gratitude. We are all instruments, the paper thought, and listened to itself disappear into sound. In time, always in time, the paper grew foxed at the edges, thin where folded, brown where sun had loved it too much. It stored recipes, wrapped a small gift, carried a final goodbye written by a steady old hand to a trembling young one. Then it too returned to scraps, fire, earth. On the last day, the family burned the pile of unusable rags and failed paper near the garden. The flame was clean and not unkind. The flax felt itself become light and heat and then ash that would feed next year's beans. Smoke rose and took with it the smell of meadows and laundries and babies and varnish and pencil shavings and candle wax. "I am not lost," said the smoke to the sky. "I am ancient traveling." Spring came exactly on time, as it always does no matter our opinion. In the same meadow the ground made a modest proposal. "Shall we try blue again?" The farmer sowed, the rain agreed, the sun signed his name with a flourish. Flax sprouted, fine green hairs combed by wind, then stood up taller, then opened the clear eyes of its flowers. "Look at me," said the new flax not loudly, and the lark, older and yet not, spun his ribbon of song through the bright air. Somewhere a woman opened a drawer and touched a letter. Somewhere else a painter wiped blue from a brush and saved a sky. A child blew her nose on a clean handkerchief and forgot she had cried. A linen sheet turned back its corner for sleep. If you wish, a moral to pin like a sprig of blue to the story's lapel, let it be this. Moral: the world's gentlest strength is the strength that yields to purpose. To be broken into usefulness, spun into service, woven into care, worn thin by love and remade again. This is not loss but a long fidelity. Be like flax. Accept the changing hands, and you will touch every season with grace. If you're still with us watching this video, it means you truly enjoyed it. So make sure to share it with your friends and family, so more people can experience peaceful sleep through these stories. There's a little bit of silence at the end of the video, but don't skip it or close the video early. When viewers leave in the middle, YouTube thinks our video isn't good, and it stops recommending it to new people. This affects my motivation, and when the video performs well, it inspires me to bring you more relaxing and comforting stories. You can help spread these videos to more people. Lower the volume of your phone a bit, place it beside you, close your eyes, take long, deep breaths, and drift off to sleep peacefully with this video. Good night.